Good evening. I'm Barry Vann, the author of In Search of Ulster Scots Land and Puritan Islam. Tonight we're going to conclude our 5-part series with the discussion on Can We Keep It? I hope you'll join me. In Session 4, we took a look at the role played by the Protestant work ethic and liberty in forging an entrepreneurial spirit that has helped America impact the world in many positive ways. As we also discussed in Session 2, Seeds of Dissent, Flowers of Liberty, tradition says that Ben Franklin entertained questions from curious observers as he left the old State House in Philadelphia at the conclusion of the Constitutional Convention. When asked by an observer what kind of government we had, Franklin reportedly said, "A republic, madam, if you can keep it." End of quote. Why did he warn his questioner that she might not be able to keep the new republic? While the nature of tyranny has certainly changed since Franklin made that declaration, he was well aware of the dangers that centralized power posed to the fledgling republic. After all, he had lived it. Moreover, he saw what life was like elsewhere because he spent more than a decade in England and France. Franklin believed that to keep a republic, the constituency had to be engaged, ethical, and virtuous. As he considered the forces that could threaten the republic, he drew on his experience and knowledge of history that suggested that a strong monarchy was the main menace to a free people. It's important to remember and appreciate that Franklin died 28 years before Karl Marx, the founder of communism, was born. The tyranny of the collective, which is called for in communism, was not viewable through Franklin's new bifocals, but it should be on our radar screen. Marxism or communism are clear expressions of tyranny of the collective. But because those labels are associated with failed and dismal states like Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, the Soviet Union, and North Korea, they're not popular terms today. Instead, elements of communism and socialism, its less intimidating sister, still appear today in a variety of less threatening guises. Each of those guises are presented as expressions of compassion, open-mindedness, tolerance, and equality of outcome, among others. Each seeks major social and cultural transformation. But who could argue with people receiving a nice paycheck or feeling accepted in society? But the devil is in the details. For instance, what does society do with people that the cultural police deem intolerant? What economic and social costs are required to make everyone the same, regardless of their talents and efforts? To what extent would tribalism be encouraged due to real and perceived economic social inequalities in society? As autonomous beings, some of the details where the devil is hidden lies in our own hearts and minds. In a world of incredible intellectual and motivational diversity, the only way to ensure equality of outcome is to institute tyranny by a despot or the collective. An autonomous adult is an anathema to collectivists. With recent history as our guide, the outcome will be most likely a bloodbath and anarchy as neo-Marxists and socialists use identity politics to pit groups of people against each other. To more fully appreciate that thought, let's take a look at what happens under the dictatorship of the collective. As is often the case, dictatorships of the collective start off with well-meaning intentions. It all started with Karl Marx, who was born into a German Jewish family in 1818 in what is today Trier, Germany. About the time of Karl's birth, his father, who wanted to practice law in Prussia, changed his name from Heschel Levi, a Jewish name, to Heinrich Marx, a German name. To make sure he could practice law, he converted to the Lutheran Church, the state religion of Prussia. Prussia was a state within what's today Germany. The founder of communism apparently had a strong relationship with his father, who died while Karl was still in college. Heinrich set a personal example of the power of economics to shape one's religious beliefs. This thought would come back to shape Marx's larger views on society, unfortunately. Despite marrying into a noble Prussian family that was Protestant, Marx was an atheist and became increasingly radicalized throughout his college career. He came to see all social institutions as part of a superstructure that supported the economic system and the owners of the tools of production. Marx started off his higher education at the University of Bonn in Germany, but his grades began to suffer. His father, unhappy with Karl's progress, pushed him to transfer to the University of Berlin. His research ideas, however, were too far to the left for Berlin's faculty. Marx eventually earned a PhD in 1841 at the University of Jena, where a more liberal faculty saw merit in his ideas. With the death of his father in 1838, his source of financial support dwindled. He did not have to wait long to find a new benefactor, however. In 1844, he met Friedrich Engels, a Prussian business owner who was delighted to support Marx. Engels was also credited with collaborating with Karl on a number of writing projects, including the Communist Manifesto, which was released as a book in February of 1848. The manifesto called for the overthrow of the bourgeoisie, French term for the owners of the tools of production, capitalists, and all existing social conditions. To usher in that kind of social change, Marx called for a dictatorship of the proletariat. That's the working class. Admittedly, the world that Marx observed featured a large class of workers who toiled away 12 to 16 hours a day, sometimes 6-7 days a week, while the owners of the tools of production had many hours of leisure and opulence. So, in Marx's way of thinking, the proletariat had a just right to overthrow their taskmasters. Neo-Marxists today share the same opinion, folks. Here again, the devil is in the details. Let's take a look at the road to centralized authority. Central or important to Marx's ideas was the supremacy of economic power in society. Society, in Marx's way of thinking, was divided into the haves, the bourgeoisie, and the have-nots, the proletariat. The road to a communist state would begin when a small group of proletariat leaders seized control of the apparatus of government and all capitalist enterprises operating in their country. In theory, there would be a period of time in which the government or the group of proletariat would operate as a dictatorship over the government and over the economic system. The group's mission would be to dismantle the economic structure and redistribute the country's wealth. At some point in the future, which no communist regime has ever achieved, the state and social classes would disappear, leaving in their wake a utopian community with no inequalities. From the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution in Russia to the 1975 rise of the Communist Party of Kampuchea, which was more popularly known as the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, between 65 and 106 million souls, and those are conservative numbers, folks, were snuffed out by well-meaning collectivists. It seems that the dictatorship of the proletariat is sticky because collectivists who are motivated by power find it tough to let go. If they did, a new hierarchy would surely emerge because mentally stable adults who are autonomous beings are differentially skilled and motivated. Those motivations, skills, and talents will lead to different outcomes. That's a product of liberty. Nonetheless, collectivists suppress individualism and think in terms of class or some other grouping based on, for example, gender, ethnicity, and now sexual orientation. They literally judge a book by its cover, and they absolutely stereotype people based on their immutable or ascribed traits. That's a dangerous perspective. Let's take a look at that. Here are country-specific civilian casualty numbers from 1917 to 1978. Please consider them, and remember, these are conservative. The numbers are probably higher than these. It all started off with the Bolshevik Revolution that took place from 1917 to 1922 in Russia. 8 million people who were civilians were killed. The Soviet Union, which rose in the wake of the Bolshevik Revolution, From 1922 to 1953, 20 million people who were civilians died, and that's conservative. China, from 1949 to 1976, under Mao Zedong, 65 million people were killed, and that too is a conservative number. Now, here's something that a lot of people take issue with, and that's Germany. Germany under Adolf Hitler. The Nazi Party ran the state. Hitler was in charge of the Nazi Party. Nazi stood for the National Socialist Workers' Party. Okay? Socialist. The government was leftist. Their orientation towards nationalism can be considered conservative or right. But when it came to operating the economy and the exercise of the power of the state over the people, it was a socialist regime. 11 million people were killed. Cambodia, or Kampuche in Southeast Asia, right next door to Vietnam, during the, in the wake of the Vietnam conflict, from 1975 to 1978, 2 million people were killed. And if you want to know more about that, watch the movie The Killing Fields. It's a true story. In just those 5 countries, 106 million civilians died under the tyranny of socialists and communists. In addition, thousands have been killed in Cuba, Zimbabwe, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. Some observers, like President Barack Obama, have claimed that Christians and Muslims have killed in the name of their religions, as if to equalize human atrocities. The Crusades, which were in part a reaction to Muslim inroads in the Iberian Peninsula, that's modern-day Spain and Portugal, as well as the Balkans and southeastern Europe, where Count Dracula or Vlad the Impaler lived, were initiated by Erastian governments. An Erastian government is a government that acts in supremacy over ecclesiastical or church and religious bodies. So, the Crusades lasted from the late 11th century through the 13th century. While no official numbers of casualties exist, it is believed that between 1 and 2 million people died. That is less than 1% of the number of souls that were murdered by centralizing governments in only 61 years. Although communism and socialism had suffered some in the public opinion over those killings and the collapse of governments, postmodernists have picked up the elimination of inequalities agenda by categorizing people into groups of the oppressed and oppressor. Just as the Nazis demonized Jews by labeling them as thieves and the unfairly privileged, many colleges and universities, as well as government agencies in the United States, categorize people as members of groups with an eye toward eliminating racial privilege, male privilege, and even Christian privilege. Whereas Marx saw social class as the dividing line for inequalities, postmodernists see gender, ethnic, and even sexual orientation groups as unequal shareholders of wealth and power. Advocates of that worldview either have no idea or do not care if their allegations create psychological harm in people or lead to irreconcilable political damage and even bloodshed. One's individual circumstances mean little to them because group identification is all that is important. Uniting groups of people who see themselves as oppressed grants power to the leaders of collectivist movements. Let us not forget that the leaders of these movements have the potential to become another Stalin, Mao, Mugabe, or Pol Pot. It will be easy for them to mobilize vindictive policies and actions against their alleged oppressor. Fundamentally, is that any different from how the Nazis saw Jews or Pol Pot view business and professional people? Many proponents of collectivist movements today contend that other socialist and communist movements in the past have failed because their leaders were not as ethically motivated as themselves, despite the fact that collectivism has been tried on every inhabited continent at a cost of over 100 million lives. If we do not recall the poetic words of President John F. Kennedy, who reminded us that power leads us towards arrogance, we will forfeit the best antidote to tyranny by the collective, or a despot for that matter, which is a balance of powers. It's the best defense, and it is built upon is built into our republic and Constitution. So, can we keep it? Well, as Ronald Reagan would say, it's up to you and me. Thank you for joining me on this journey of American Exceptionalism. I hope you'll watch all the sessions. And please click subscribe. I don't know why I can't say that word. Subscribe. God bless you. Good night.